Pinning all the team chances on Pensac could help a rival rider. As riders have said for decades, the Tour is not always won at Alpe d'Huez, but is usually lost there. Legends add that in the early 1950s, two scouts for the Tour drove up the dirt roads to the ski resort, got out of their car near the 1,860-meter summit, and stared at each other in dumb wonder. Alpe d'Huez has been on the Tour schedule many years since then, especially in the last decade. Its roads have been graded and paved, but its 21 hairpin turns are no less terrible now than they were then, especially with at least 250,000 people lining the ramps, pouring water over the riders, running alongside them to shout encouragement, clapping them on the back, giving those who are struggling an illegal push. Year after year, it is the Tour's theater of high drama, and so it was once again. Two of the leading teams had worked out precise strategy for this 11th stage, 182.5 kilometers from Saint-Gervais. At breakfast that morning, the Z team decided that Ronan Pensac would concentrate on staying with Claudio Chiappucci and Raul Alcala, the two best climbers closest to his yellow jersey, and Greg LeMond would watch Giano Bugno and Pedro Delgado, the two favorites further down the general classification. If Delgado was ready to make his move, the theory went, daunting Alpe d'Huez was the place. At the Banestros team's hotel, Delgado was indeed listening to instructions how he was going to go on the offensive. The strategy was simple enough. His teammates would attack and string out the pack on the first two climbs over the 1,984-meter-high Madeleine, rated beyond category and difficulty, and the 1,950-meter-high Glandon, rated first category. Those two passed, Delgado himself would do the heavy work on the way up to Alpe d'Huez. Check? Check. After a speedy 45 kilometers in the first hour, Juan Martinez Oliveira of Banestro was sent ahead along the valley leading to the Madeleine. The race exploded, breaking the pack into a lead group of 50 with 130 others strung down the mountain. When Martinez Oliveira was caught with 7 kilometers of the 23-kilometer climb left, Jesus Rodriguez Margot was the next Banestro rider to attack. Then it was Miguel Indurain's turn. The Basque turned the pace even higher on the descent and reached the feed zone between the Madeleine and the Glandon more than a minute ahead of the main pursuit group. Banestro's strategy was working, and so was Z's. Both teams were well represented at the front, and LeMond was staying with Delgado until suddenly the American crashed in the feed zone while transferring his sandwiches and pastries to his jersey pockets. "I fell on my left hand," he said later. "The middle finger was all bent at an angle, and I had to pull it straight and push it back into its socket." He also had a moment of panic when he realized that he had knocked down a female spectator, but her husband yelled at him, "She's okay, get going, Greg." He went. Up ahead, far along on the 21-meter Glandon climb, Indurain was being overtaken by Thierry Claverelet, who left the Basque more than a minute behind as he went over the peak and began to dream about his second successful stage victory in the Alps. 3.5 minutes behind the Frenchman was the main pack. As it came down the Glandon, Delgado made his move, attacking on a steep 1-kilometer rise and leaving behind most of his rivals except for LeMond and Bugno. "When Delgado went, I could have caught him," Pensac remembered. "There was only 10 meters between me and Bugno. But that wasn't our team strategy. Delgado and Bugno were for Greg to deal with. I followed our plan. Pensac stayed with Chiappucci. The second rider he was watching, Alcala, was having a bad day, the kind of bad day that loses a Tour and was left in their dust. Once past the short climb, the descending group picked up new speed and briefly was nearly 2 minutes ahead. Paced by Delgado and sometimes Bugno, the group included LeMond, Indurain, Claverelet, and Eduardo Chozas, strong climbers all. At the foot of Alpe d'Huez, they had widened their lead to 2 minutes and 30 seconds on the Pensac group. On the way up, Indurain was dropped first, then Chozas, and then Claverelet. The three favorites rode together through the hairpin turns and swarms of screaming fans in what might have become the first major breakaway since Futuroscope, except that Bugno and LeMond refused to relay Delgado. "I really don't understand why Bugno didn't help pull on the way up," LeMond would say at the finish. "If he had, they never would have caught us." Delgado was equally puzzled. "Too bad it was Bugno and LeMond who followed me on the Glandon," the Spaniard said. "Anybody else and we'd have been far gone. They never worked with me. Bugno took part in a few relays before he started up Alpe d'Huez, but never again. I just don't understand." For Bugno, it was simple. He explained later that more than 10 minutes down on Pensac, he decided he had a lesser chance of significantly reducing the deficit than he had of winning the stage. He was not going to win the Tour de France, he understood, and preferred to save his strength and bank everything on the prestigious victory at Alpe d'Huez. If Delgado could not understand this, he had no problem diagnosing why Le Mans had not cooperated. He played the team's game and not helping, Delgado realized. With the yellow jersey in his team, you couldn't expect him to help. As he had promised, Le Mans was honoring team etiquette. I just stayed on Delgado's wheel, he admitted, but I said to myself, if I could work, what a day we could have. 3 kilometers from the top, just before the road begins to straighten and pass huge hotels, Delgado weakened, and his 2 companions went by him. Hard behind them came a revived Claverolet. Abelardo Rondon of Banestro, Fabio Parra of Kelm, and Eric Brukink of PDM. At the final left turn into an uphill 300-meter finish, Le Mans looked ready to record his first stage victory in this tour. Then he swung far too wide, unable to apply pressure on his brakes because of his injured finger, and nearly clipped a steel barrier holding back spectators. As he straightened out, he realized that he was in too big a gear for the sprint, but had no time to shift down. Determinedly, he launched the sprint for the line, but in the last 10 meters, Buño passed him and finished first by less than half a wheel. In 10th place, 48 seconds behind Buño, Pensac kept his yellow jersey. "I've got the best team in the world," he said. "The work they did for me was fantastic." So it was, especially the role Robert Miller played in shepherding Pensac up Alpe d'Huez. "He set the perfect pace for me," Pensac said of his Scottish teammate. "Only once or twice did I have to ask him to slow down a little. The trick was going up at my own rhythm and not forcing it. I never imagined I could make up the 2 minutes on Greg, Buño, and Delgado. But I never panicked. I knew that Greg wouldn't ride against me." The winners and losers were easy to count. The foremost loser was Alcala, in 30th place for the day, 5 minutes and 41 seconds behind Buño, and now dropped into 8th place overall. Delgado was another loser, finishing 8th and losing 40 seconds to Buño in Le Mans. His lieutenant Indurain lost 11 minutes and 55 seconds. Steve Bauer lost 21 minutes and 45 seconds, and Stephen Roche, who won the Tour so handily in 1987, lost 24 minutes and 13 seconds. Faring even worse, Eric van der Ridden, a Belgian with Buckler, was caught being towed by a team car up Alpe d'Huez and was disqualified. The winners? Pensac, of course. Even Chiappucci, who finished 13th, losing 1 minute and 26 seconds, but staying within sight of Pensac. Claverolet, too, with his fine 4th place and the big lead he opened on Chiappucci in the fight for the best climber's jersey. Andy Hempston replaced Bauer as 7-Eleven's leader, finishing 7th, 40 seconds down and moving into the top 10. Even Le Mans could be counted among the winners. He had moved into 3rd place overall. If he had not made up much time on Pensac, he had played the team game another day and gained new respect. A day after he became the man to beat in the Tour de France, Ronan Pensac was beaten, and badly. Finishing far distance in an uphill time trial, he lost the yellow jersey in the 12th stage. "Do I really have the yellow jersey?" gasped an unbelieving Claudio Chiappucci as he tried to recover his breath after crossing the finish line. Unofficially, the Italian knew he did. Chiappucci had been kept informed of his and Pensac's time by a Carrera team car during the 35.5-kilometer race against the clock from Fontaine, outside Grenoble, to the lushly green resort of Villard-de-Lans. When Chiappucci asked the question, Pensac was still out on the road and nothing was certifiable. Not until the Frenchman failed to cross the line 1 minute and 28 seconds after the Italian did the jersey change hands. In fact, Pensac took nearly 3 minutes before he thrashed his way to the finish, now 1 minute and 17 seconds behind and in 2nd place. As he said later, people must have laughed to watch how slowly he negotiated the last 2 kilometers. "I went well for the first 5 kilometers, and that was it," Pensac continued. "After that, I felt as if I didn't have any strength at all." He looked to the day off the next day to regain his power. 1 minute, 17 seconds, that's not so bad, is it? I've seen worse, and Chiappucci is alone. He doesn't have my team, and he's got the pressure on him now." Eyes downcast, Pensac sounded as if after his one day he fully understood what pressure the yellow jersey exerted. The stage was won by the resurgent Eric Brukink in 56 minutes 52 seconds. Second, 30 seconds slower, was Pedro Delgado, who launched his drive to victory in the 1988 Tour with a victory in the same Villard-de-Lans time trial. Third, 43 seconds behind Brukink, was Miguel Indurain, who showed no signs of his collapse the previous day on Alpe d'Huez. Efforts spent on that stage were prominent in Chiappucci's thinking about the yellow jersey. I thought Pensac would be exhausted after his hard climb yesterday, and so I went all out today, he said. Although he lost 38 seconds to Pensac at Alpe d'Huez, Chiappucci had remained confident, saying, "I feel strong, and I haven't given up my dream of taking the yellow jersey." And now here it was. Pensac was not the only one to show ill effects after the long climb. Greg LeMond, normally a fine time trialer and a marvel at recuperation, had to fight hard over the second half of the course to finish fifth overall, falling from third place to fourth behind Brukink. LeMond, however, was really a big winner. With Pensac back in the Z jersey, the pale blue one with the puffy yellow cloud, the American was now free to work for himself, and perhaps his second consecutive victory in the Tour. With half the race over, LeMond was finally unleashed. He was flourishing in the hot sun of the Alps and appeared ready to roll. Brukink shared this evaluation. "I know Greg," he said, "and the only thing for him is winning. I look for Greg to attack in the Pyrenees." After a much-needed day off, the 13th stage from Villard-de-Lans to Saint-Étienne, a short and rolling 149 kilometers, was expected to fit into the framework of transition days. Stages between one major rendezvous, in this case the Alps, and another, the Pyrenees. By tradition, transition days are left to secondary riders to fight it out for the stage victory that satisfies their honor and their sponsors' desire for publicity. Nobody declares a truce, though, and leaders are free to attack. Attacking was exactly what Greg LeMond had in mind, and his Z team with him. "We decided to toughen the race," revealed Roger Leger, the Z coach. "We didn't know what to think about Chiappucci, and we decided to find out. The easiest way was to toughen the race and see if we couldn't get him to self-destruct by pushing his team to the limit." The strategy worked brilliantly. From the start, when Phil Anderson of TVM, just the sort of rider, low in general classification but high in ambition, who looks for a victory on a transition day, attacked on the steep descent from Villard-de-Lans to the blazing plains of the Rhone Valley, the pack was forced to work hard. It covered the first 34 kilometers in 38 minutes. The French especially were riding, seeking a victory on this Bastille day. Two more breaks were undone, with the Carrera team riding all out to protect its leader. At kilometer 55, the fourth attack developed, and this time Ronan Pensac went off with a group of 30 riders on a short, steep hill. They soon had a lead of 1 minute and 36 seconds on Chiappucci, more than wiping out Pensac's deficit of 1 minute and 17 seconds. The attack was too serious to be left unanswered. Surprisingly, Chiappucci led his Carrera teammates in pursuit, and they whittled the lead down to 6 riders by kilometer 105. The work was hot, tiring, and close to fatal for Chiappucci, who admitted later that he should have left the chasing to his teammates. He had nothing left to give when LeMond suddenly attacked, taking with him Eric Brukink. "I saw that Carrera and especially Chiappucci were shot, so I decided to go," LeMond said. "I was worried that Brukink would refuse, but he agreed and we went." Joined by Miguel Indurain of Banesto, Andy Hampston of 7-Eleven, Eduardo Chozas of Once, and Roberto Conti of Ariostia, they swept past the 6 leaders and began the second breakaway to blow open the Tour. If Chiappucci was unable to follow, Pedro Delgado still felt strong, but unfortunately for him, had decided to shadow the Italian. By the time he realized that he had missed the big break, its lead was 1 minute and 30 seconds. Delgado counterattacked 10 kilometers later at the start of a 10-kilometer climb to the Croix de Chaboret Pass. He cut the lead to 75 seconds before Indurain was ordered to drop back and tug him along, which he did strongly enough to reduce the lead to 20 seconds at the 1,201-meter summit. Down the descent, LeMond drove his group of 5 and into Saint-Étienne, where he waved the others ahead to fight out the sprint. In a contest without a true sprinter, Chozas managed to get his wheel across the line first. "The sprint?" LeMond asked. "It didn't interest me at all." He would have been the logical winner, but feared that his presence would have caused enough slowdowns and maneuverings to cost the group 30 seconds. That was exactly the time behind that Delgado, Marino Lageretta, and Giano Bugno finished. Struggling far back, Chiappucci lost 4 minutes and 53 seconds. The lead that seemed so vast only the day before was now barely above 2 minutes. LeMond had taken a serious option on another victory in the Tour de France. For once, Chiappucci had something to say. He had been so overwhelmed by what had happened to put him into the yellow jersey 2 days before. Even Italian reporters had failed to extract anything useful from an interview with him. As a loser, Chiappucci turned articulate. "I made a mistake," he admitted. "I never should have done all that work chasing Pensac. I should have waited for things to develop." He looked around beseechingly. After years of success with such formidable leaders as Stephen Roche and Roberto Vincentini, the Carrera team was weak and had entered the Tour only out of force of habit. As Chiappucci knew, he was the sort of rider who was accustomed to working for a leader, not being one. Of course, he had pitched in when things got rough. That was his training, and until this race, his job. So there was nothing small-minded about it when he pointed out that at least he had the satisfaction of seeing Pensac caught. He had finished nearly 3 minutes behind Chiappucci, and he was now effectively removed as a potential Tour winner. That was the sort of pleasure Chiappucci was accustomed to taking when he rode for his leader. The man in the yellow jersey just didn't get it. He seemed to be expecting Roche or Vincentini to come along, ruffle his hair, and tell him he had done just fine. Claudio Chiappucci had learned something the day before, and, solid professional that he was, applied the lesson. On the 205-kilometer 14th stage from La Puy-en-Velay to Millau, Chiappucci was again left behind, but this time continued to ride at his own pace. Z and Banesto tried everything to get me to explode again, but this time I rode differently, he said, proudly. I saved myself for the last climb, and I had enough left to handle it. Finishing 13th, 47 seconds down, he still lost 13 more seconds to Greg LeMond, Pedro Delgado, and Eric Bruking. "Those are the ones who'll fight it out for the final victory," the Italian predicted. "I can't tell you who's strongest." Then he brightened. "But I'm still first, aren't I? Every extra day in the yellow jersey is an extra day of glory." The stage was won by Marino Lageretta, who was riding in his third major tour of the year, as he did most seasons. Nearing age 33, Lageretta had now ridden in 10 Vueltas, 6 Giros, and 7 Tours de France. He had finished as high in the Tour as 5th in 1989, but never before won a stage. "I didn't think it would happen this year because the race had been so fast," he said. On the rest day, his coach, Manuel Saez, took the Basque aside and spoke to him encouragingly for 2 hours. It wasn't enough simply to be present, Saez told him. The object was to win. So 2 kilometers from the finish on a steep first category climb, Lageretta attacked. All the leaders were just behind him, but he held them off, pushing Miguel Indurain into second place by 24 seconds. The pack looked weary as it struggled in, broken into small groups as much as 38 minutes behind. 4 riders, including notably Flavio Giappuni, the notable lead of Chiappucci's Carrera team, had abandoned on a sweltering day replete with attacks. "There were so many attacks that I wasn't sure there was nobody ahead of me when I crossed the line," Lageretta confessed. "I wasn't sure whether to lift my arms or not." He finished a half an hour ahead of the fastest time predicted by the race's organizers. And this was the day after the Saint Etienne stage had been raced at a near-record speed of 44.65 kilometers an hour. Whatever happened to uneventful transition days? Finally, an old-fashioned transition day with heroics by such riders as Charles Motet, 37th, and more than 31 minutes behind when the 170-kilometer 15th stage from Millau to Revel began. Or the unsung Giuseppe Calcaterra of Chateau d'Aix, 116th and 1 minute 18.33 seconds down. Slava Akhomov of Panasonic, 74th and 1 minute 1.7 seconds. And Edwig van Houdinoch of Buckler, 109th and 1 minute 15 and 17 seconds. Motet's victory was so meaningless that even L'Equipe, usually the most chauvinist of newspapers, refused to be carried away to frog heaven. The French in general were riding badly, with Fabrice Philippot of Castorama the highest ranked at 14th overall. Laurent Fignon hadn't made it out of Normandy, and Jean-François Bernard at 28, a somewhat aging young hope, was last heard from before the Alps, where he predictably quit. In short, it was another tour without de France. Motet was a perennial bust in the Tour, and even when he finished second to Giano Bugno in the Giro, it was difficult to believe that this was the year he would finally fulfill what was still thought of as his potential. A star time trialer in the Grand Prix des Nations, he came up empty in every race against the clock in the Tour. A smashing climber in the Dauphiné Libéré, he sank without trace on many of the same mountains in the Tour. For years he had broken hearts at L'Equipe, which traditionally listed him among the favorites. On the computer, he had ranked as high as first among the world's top 600 professionals. But when it came to the big race, The pressure was too great for Mottet. Only a week before, he had confessed that now, approaching his 28th birthday, he didn't want to fool himself. Perhaps it was time to say that he was not ever going to win the Tour. Perhaps it was time, he continued, to start thinking of stage victories instead. This was his first. The new Mottet arrived, said the headlines deep inside L'Equipe. Of Calcaterra, Ekimov, and Van Hoydonk, there was barely a word. It was that kind of stage. With a magnificent ride over 3 major peaks in the Pyrenees, Greg LeMond moved into second place overall, close to 5 seconds behind the leader, appeared to burn off all other rivals, and position himself for his second successive victory in the Tour. Despite the great day in his life, the American had few of the pure fruits of victory. He finished the 215-kilometer stage from Blagnac to the mountaintop resort of Luz Ardiden in second place, and was unable to take the yellow jersey from Claudio Chiappucci, who finished 2 minutes 19 seconds behind LeMond. But there was no mistaking the American's joy as he hugged his wife Kathy and a longtime friend and advisor Fred Mengoni at the finish line after the 16th stage. An ecstatic LeMond refused to say that the race was all but over. "I hope so," he said, "but it's not won until we finish on the Champs-Élysées, or it's not over until it's over." Told that he had gained 1 minute and 32 seconds on the rider he considered his most dangerous rival, Pedro Delgado, who had finished 8th, LeMond burst into a big grin and said redundantly, "I'm very happy about that." He gained even more time on Eric Breukink, who finally succumbed to the jour sans, the empty day, that has marked each of his Tours de France. Finishing 4 minutes and 16 seconds behind LeMond, Breukink fell from second to 4th place in general classification as Delgado moved up to 3rd. The stage, raced under sometimes cloudy skies and heavy heat, was watched by hundreds of thousands of fans. Many of them were Spaniards from just across the Pyrenees, and many of them were Basques. Flapping their yellow and red flags, they were rewarded with their victory by Miguel Indurain, Delgado's lieutenant from Banesto. After staying on LeMond's rear wheel for the last 7 kilometers, Indurain jumped off with 500 meters to go and cruised in first by 6 seconds. If the victory, after LeMond had entirely set the pace, seemed unfair to some of the non-Spanish spectators, LeMond accepted it as part of the sport. He was still looking for his first stage victory, but had other things to celebrate. For one, there was the narrowing of his deficit with Chiappucci, who rode a gallant race, and even jumped off to an unexpected attack at the start of the first climb, following Georg Müller of TVM. "I didn't intend to attack," Chiappucci said. "I was simply riding at the front and went with Müller when he attacked. I looked back and saw that we had opened a gap. That's when I decided to go all out. I thought the others would hesitate, and it was worth taking a chance." As his rivals seemed to wait for each other to react first, Chiappucci was first by 45 seconds over the Aspen Peak, 1,489 meters high, and rated first category in height and difficulty. Then came the Tourmalet, rated beyond category and 2,114 meters high, which was linked for the last 5 kilometers to the top by fans' parked cars. With a strong assist from his fellow Z-riders, LeMond then began to chase. Not a few other tours have been won and lost on the Tourmalet, he knew. No one was doing anything, he said. Chiappucci was riding the race of his life, and no one was chasing him. I had been worrying about Delgado, and I decided to forget about him. I didn't think about anything except Chiappucci's lead. Breukink started to slip back, and LeMond repeatedly glanced over his shoulder to confirm that he was leaving the Dutchman behind. Over the Tourmalet, Chiappucci and his group led LeMond by 1 minute 7 seconds, down from a high of 2 minutes and 10 seconds on the ascent. The lead kept dropping as the American towed his group through a steep and sinuous descent with almost no shoulder and a terrifying absence of guardrails or other barriers. At the bottom, just over 20 kilometers from the finish at altitude, LeMond had sped through the deficit and rejoined Chiappucci. They went up together toward Luz Ardiden, 1,715 meters high, and also rated beyond category. With 11 kilometers of the 13.5 kilometers climb left, LeMond tested the Italian by trying to jump off. Chiappucci caught him. LeMond attacked again, only to be caught again. "Each time I rode up to him and looked him in the eyes," the Italian recounted later, "I wanted to say, 'You see, I'm still here. You're not getting rid of me like that.'" Then came a brave moment for Chiappucci. In a show of force, he went to the front and stayed there for 3 more kilometers until Fabio Parra of Kelm attacked, and the dozen or so other riders in the group went with him. Except for the exhausted Chiappucci, In the sort of savvy teamwork that Z exhibited all day, Le Mans' teammate Eric Boyer even swerved the pack away from Chiappucci to make sure he had no nearby wheel to draft. Seeing this, Le Mans rode away with stunning force, followed only by Indurain and Marino Lajaretta. In a few more kilometers, they overtook the stage's early leader, Miguel Martinez Torres of Once, who had built a lead of 3 minutes and 50 seconds and been largely forgotten in the battle of the contenders raging behind him. Scenting victory, Le Mans grinned briefly as the three left Martinez Torres behind and continued to build their lead over the rest of the 161-man pack. Lajaretta was shed over the final 2 kilometers, finishing third. As Indurain and Le Mans came around the last curve, the Spaniard spurted ahead and crossed the line, clapping his hand in happiness. Indurain started the day in 18th place, mainly because of his nearly 12 minutes loss at Alpe d'Huez in the service of Delgado, and was not a contender for the final victory. The man who was, Le Mans, crossed the finish line with neither of the triumphs he had hoped for, but smiling and embracing friends, he had made Indurain seem like a sourpuss. One and all, riders, team officials, race organizers, and journalists agreed that the Tour had been decided. Refusing to tempt the fates, Greg LeMond was not claiming victory, but simply saying, "If I don't fall, if I keep my form, if I continue riding like this," while those were a lot of ifs, who could doubt that he was at his best? Not even Bernard Hinault, who rarely missed a chance to snipe at Le Mans in his column in L'Equipe. Hinault thought that if an upset was going to develop, it would not be on the next stage in the Pyrenees, from Lourdes to Pau, even if it did pass over the Aubisque Peak, rated beyond category, and the Marie Blanc, rated first category. Would the Aubisque blow the race open again? Hinault was asked. "I didn't think so after what the riders went through at Luz-Ardiden," he responded. "I don't think anybody who was crushed yesterday is looking to make any trouble today. Maybe the Aubisque will launch a rider who's trying to win the stage, but no more than that." He thought even less of the Marie Blanc's potential to dynamite the Tour. "It's so far from the finish," he pointed out. The Marie Blanc lay at almost exactly the halfway point in the 150-kilometer stage. After that, the mountains were passed. In a feisty mood after his courageous climb to Luz-Ardiden, Claudio Chiappucci had to admit that he didn't think much of his chances either. "Greg LeMond told journalists that I was finished. Well, that was my answer. I wanted to show what kind of rider I am. For the first time in my life, I'm a leader, and I wanted to prove that I can be a great leader, a true yellow jersey. I know that he's probably going to win the Tour, but he's got a great team and I don't. 5 seconds on Le Mans, that's not much, probably not enough. I know it. But Le Mans better be sure of one thing. He'll have to come looking for me if he wants to find those 5 seconds. What brave words Chiappucci spoke, and how true. What a sensible analysis Hinault presented, and how true. What a wonderful sport is bicycle racing, where true words and sensible analysis can be made to fall apart by the tiniest hole in a tire. For 20 kilometers, Le Mans lost control of the race during the 17th stage. Then he and his fellow Z riders rallied to prove the old adage that this is an individual sport practiced by teams. He earned the superb help by subordinating his personal ambitions and working for his teammate Ronan Pansec when the Frenchman was in the yellow jersey. At kilometer 77, about 800 meters from the Marie Blanc peak, the rear tire on Le Mans' bicycle flattened. "It was my first flat of the year," he said, "and it couldn't have come at a worse time." He was at the front of the pack, chasing a distant breakaway and a small group of leaders including Chiappucci, Giano Bugno, Pedro Delgado, and Miguel Indurain, Delgado's locomotive. The climb over the first of the day's 2 mountains, the 1,709-meter-high Aubisque, had gone without incident. 2, 3, 4 times Delgado attacked on the 1,035-meter climb up the Marie Blanc, and each time Le Mans and Chiappucci caught him. And then Le Mans had his flat. He charged afterward that Chiappucci, seeing the flat, violated etiquette and attacked with Delgado. "I don't forgive him," Le Mans said of the Italian rider. "This isn't something I'll forget. One day or another he'll pay for it." Chiappucci insisted that his attack toward the peak was part of a series of offenses begun by Delgado, and denied that he had breached a code of conduct. Many observers even wondered if, in an age of million-dollar contracts, there really was room in the sport for much etiquette. Attacks after a crash used to be considered a low thing to do, and now they are not uncommon. More rare is the attack while riders are stopped at the side of the road to urinate. Another violation of the rule in the old days, but now just how Joel Puehler won the stage into Futuroscope in the 1988 Tour. An attack in a feed zone provoked acrimony in the first Tour de Trump, and yet it has long been a standard tactic in European racing. In short, nobody gets overly upset anymore at an attack after a flat. Le Mans' anger had other causes. He was troubled by a deep saddle sore that, along with nervousness, was causing him to lose sleep, especially the nights before the stages in the Pyrenees. It was an extremely hot and muggy day and a week of torrid weather, and his feet had swollen and were paining him. Worse, he was alone in the lead group, and his team car was far behind him, blocked in traffic on the narrow road. It was the first time I had no teammates with me to give me a wheel, Le Mans related. It was the first time the team car was so far behind. It was a lot of firsts. Another first, or no more than a second, was that Chiappucci was surrounded by 4 Carrera teammates. We poured it on, confirmed Acacio da Silva. It's the Tour, and in the Tour you don't give an opponent any presents. Far behind, Le Mans was raging. I waited. It seemed like hours, he said. Actually, it was little over a minute before Roger Leger, the Z Team's directeur sportif, pulled alongside his rider. While a mechanic replaced the rear wheel, the 2 Z teammates, Eric Boyer and Jérôme Simon, arrived. We just couldn't keep up with Greg on the climb, Boyer said. And we know he was isolated. Jérôme and I said to each other, let's get going. Greg is alone up there. Then we heard spectators yelling at us, hurry up, Greg has a flat. When we reached Greg, he kept saying that he was very worried. That minute it took him to get going seemed like an hour to him. He thought he was losing the Tour, Greg kept saying. I've blown it. I've lost the race. Le Mans got back on his bicycle, but had to stop again after 25 meters because the new wheel was rubbing the frame. This time he was given another bicycle and set off with Boyer and Simon behind him. Chiappucci was over the Marie Blanc and his lead was 1 minute and 7 seconds. Far ahead in the breakaway of about 30 low-ranking riders were 2 other Z teammates, Gilbert Duclos-Lassalle and Adel Kvasvol. Using his car telephone, Leger got in touch with his assistant, Serge Boucherie, who was covering the lead riders, and ordered that they stop and wait for Le Mans. For Duclos, this was a heartbreaker, since he was riding for the stage victory in his native region of France. But of course, it's part of my job, he said. I'm nearly 36 years old, and I'm going to win my first Tour with Greg. That's worth a chance at a stage victory. Once over the peak, Le Mans led the charge down it. He rode in a frenzy, a man both angry and, as he admitted, scared of losing. I've never risked my life like that before, and I hope I never have to again. How fast was he going? Jean-Francois Pechot, the Tour official who rides a motorcycle and relays time splits between breakaways and the pack, was awed. I've never seen a descent that fast, he said as he sliced a zigzag with his right hand. That was the road, and Le Mans never braked once. He took each curve at top speed. He must have been hitting 80 kilometers an hour. I thought he was crazy. Boyer would never be disloyal enough to question his leader's sanity, but he was shaking afterward. We never touched the brakes, he confirmed, and we couldn't keep up with Greg. At the bottom, they linked up with Duclos and Kvasvol, taking turns at the front. The 5 rode a mini-team time trial and soon were in sight of Chiappucci. After a 20-kilometer, 25-minute chase, Le Mans was back with the leaders. They stayed together the rest of the way into Pau, where the pack finished 5 minutes, 31 seconds behind Dmitry Konachev, who became the first Soviet to win a stage in the Tour. Later, Chiappucci complained that except for one pull by Indurain on the descent from the Marie Blanc, nobody had been willing to help him and his teammates. Le Mans has a lot of friends in the pack, he charged. Le Mans did, and 8 of them rode on his team. He himself insisted that he had not protected Ponsat simply out of respect for team etiquette. No, he said, it's tactics. It's like a football team. You have players, and you have to use the players to your advantage. It's not just short term. I know what the Tour de France is, and I had the underlying hope that it would dismantle. One of my better qualities is that I am very patient, and I like to wait things out. But I would never play the same game Hinault did. I know we're a team for 3 years together, and I know that if I want to be able to live with Ronan, we've got to work together. Besides, for me, it worked out fine. At the very top, the next 2 stages leading into the time trial at the Lac de Vassiviri were uneventful. Claudio Chiappucci stayed on Greg LeMond's rear wheel from Pau to Bordeaux on the 18th stage, and then from Castillon-la-Bataille to Limoges on the 19th. It didn't bother me, LeMond said equably. It's normal. I'd keep him on edge with little attacks, but when there's somebody glued to your wheel, there's no way you're going to drop him by seconds. I figured that it would all come down to the time trial. LeMond seemed extremely confident. Speaking of the time trial, he said of himself and Chiappucci, if I lose, I'm going to have a very, very bad day, and he's going to have the best day of his life. While they dueled, a battle for third place developed between Eric Breukink and Pedro Delgado, who led the Dutchman by just 7 seconds. That changed on the flat, blazingly hot stage, 202 kilometers into Bordeaux, almost always a field day for the sprinters who have suffered in the mountains for the opportunity of just such a finish. This time, neither of the two men who fought it out could be reckoned exactly a sprinter, Broelkink and Giano Bugno. The Italian broke away with 10 kilometers to go and managed by a second to become the first double-stage winner of the Tour. What a handsome double it was. Alpe d'Huez, the king of the mountains, and Bordeaux, the queen of the plains. Bugno's victory was the first by an Italian in Bordeaux since 1957, when Pierino Baffi won. To underline that this was Italy's year in bicycle racing, 4 of the first 5 men across the line were Italian. Bugno, Roberto Gusmeroli of Chateau d'Ax 3rd, Giovanni Fidanza of Chateau d'Ax 4th, and Adriano Baffi of Arioste, the son of Pierino Baffi, 5th. For Broelkink, the payoff came in the 18 seconds he gained on Delgado to move into 3rd place. The next stage was another turnaround, with a certified sprinter winning after a long solo breakaway. He was Guido Bontempi, Chiappucci's teammate, who took off with 30 kilometers to go and came home an easy victor. On another day, with a 182.5-kilometer ride through Bordeaux wine country and its greening hills, and then into the Dordogne and Périgord, Bontempi would surely have reaped more publicity. Today, all eyes were elsewhere, out beyond the suburbs of Limoges and at the Lac de Vassivière. It wasn't close. Greg LeMond sped away from Claudio Chiappucci in the showdown time trial and donned the yellow jersey for the first time since the prologue. Making up his 5-second deficit easily, LeMond finished 2 minutes, 21 seconds ahead of the Italian. Today the Tour is finished, said Eric Broelkink, who won the time trial, the 20th stage. LeMond was still not claiming victory, however, since there remained the final, largely ceremonial ride into Paris the next day. I was very strong today, he admitted as he loosened the straps on his shoes and sat to await Chiappucci's finish. LeMond finished 5th in the 45.5-kilometer time trial around the Lac de Vassivière, where he recorded the first stage victory by an American in 1985. Broelkink finished in 1 hour, 2 minutes, 40 seconds on another scorching day. Second was his PDM teammate, Raul Alcalá, who trailed by 28 seconds. Then came Marino Lajarreta, 10 seconds further back, with Miguel Indurain 2 seconds behind him. LeMond was next, 57 seconds behind Broelkink, while Chiappucci was 17th, 3 minutes and 18 seconds behind. He managed to keep second place overall, 13 seconds ahead of Broelkink. I wasn't forcing it at the end because I was thinking about the overall standings, not the individual victory, LeMond said. If he had pushed himself over the last few kilometers, he continued, he would have run the risk of exploding, the sudden loss of power and speed that follows overexertion. Chiappucci showed just such signs near the end as he struggled in slowly. Starting 3 minutes behind the American, he trailed him by ever-increasing gaps at every checkpoint. At kilometer 10, LeMond was clocked in at 14 minutes and 2 seconds, and Chiappucci at 14 minutes and 13 seconds. At kilometer 22, LeMond passed in 29 minutes 56 seconds, and Chiappucci in 30 minutes 27 seconds. At kilometer 33, it was LeMond in at 43:10 and Chiappucci in 44:27. When LeMond reached the finish line, Chiappucci was 3 kilometers behind and trailing badly. As the Italian fell 6 seconds behind LeMond in any possible finish, the news was relayed to the American, who giggled nervously to hear that he was leading the Tour for the first time since it started. He looked calm and intense at the start, wearing his baby blue Z-Team cap backwards, en bataille, as the French say, or ready for combat. LeMond disdained most of his usual aerodynamic aids, using a regular road bicycle, not a plunging frame. He rode without disc wheels, but with the same triathlete extension on his handlebars that carried him to victory in the final time trial of the 1989 Tour. Many other riders used a rear disc wheel, and most had the triathlete clip-on bars. Chiappucci rejected both, the wheels and the bars. It all depends on the legs, he said before setting off. But more than legs were needed. This was a highly technical course, an often narrow, twisting road with many small climbs and descents. The riders had to make dozens of decisions about when to shift gears while trying to keep as steady a rhythm as possible. LeMond knew the course well from the 1985 Tour. It followed the banks of the lake only briefly before turning into the hills, where dark copses of pines and scrub oaks cast their shadows onto the road. Neither LeMond nor Chiappucci would have noticed the sidelong vistas as they concentrated on the road. It dipped and turned, rose and fell as it led to the finish and the change in leadership. There were a few boats out sailing on the Lac de Vassiviere, and here and there were some swimmers, but mainly everybody was standing on the side of the road and watching one of the epic stages in the long history of the Tour. Unchallengeable in the lead and glowing in his yellow jersey, Greg LeMond cruised into Paris the next day as the winner of the Tour for the second successive year. When the 156-man field swept through the last of 8 laps on the Champs-Élysées and passed the finish line, LeMond jerked his arms upward in a sign of victory. That gesture is usually left to the stage winner, but the American's jubilance was understandable. Barely 3 months before, he had been forced to drop out of a minor and short race in Washington because of a combination of undertraining and viral infection. And now he was once again the winner of the world's greatest bicycle race, 3 weeks long and covering 3,412 kilometers. I was very nervous until I saw the Champs-Élysées, he acknowledged as photographers threatened to overwhelm him. I almost cried when we reached it. By finishing 2 minutes 16 seconds ahead of Claudio Chiappucci, LeMond collected a check for about $350,000, which he said he would give to his teammates. They deserve it, he explained. His feat moved him out of a crowd with 2 victories in the Tour de France and into the elite company of Philippe Thys, a Belgian who won in 1913, 14, and 20, and Louison Bobet, a Frenchman who won in 1953, 54, and 55. Ahead of them in Tour victories were only Jacques Anquetil, Eddy Merckx, and Bernard Hinault, with 5 each. LeMond says he plans to race 3 more years. Unless it is a time trial, of course, part of the final day is traditionally given over to skylarking. In their relief to have made it to the end of the Tour, the riders put aside even the tightest of competitions among themselves, accepting the order that has been determined. So Eric Broekink did not attempt to regain the 13 seconds that separated him from second place, nor Marino Lageretta the 4 seconds that separated him from fourth place, nor Andy Hempston the 7 seconds that separated him from 10th. Instead, on the 182.5-kilometer trip from Bretigny-sur-Orge, the riders chatted and mugged for the television cameras, with LeMond even raising Chiappucci's hand to show he had forgiven the bitter feelings after the Pau stage. They turned serious only when Paris approached, and with it, the chance for a final piece of glory. Year after year, riders attempt to break away on the Champs-Élysées and steal a victory, and year after year, the finish is a field sprint. So it was one more time after a handful of doomed attacks on the wide avenue lined by 500,000 spectators. Johan Museeuw, a Belgian who rides for Lotto, won the mass sprint, easily beating Adriano Baffi and Olaf Ludwig. On every lap I studied the finish, Museeuw said, and I decided that I had to be in front at the last corner. Coming out of the Place de la Concorde for a final time, Museeuw took the right-hand curve in first position as planned and carved a 20-meter lead. He held part of it to the line in what became the only true mass finish of the Tour. LeMond did not bother to contest the sprint and thus surrendered any chance he had of winning a stage. Not often does a Tour winner fail to pick up a stage victory along the way. All spring he was criticized for being out of condition and failing to appear in races while wearing the jersey of the world champion. During the Tour, the criticism, mainly by some old-timers, focused on his alleged lack of panache or flair in not winning a stage. A typical comment came from Lucien Van Impe, a Belgian who won the Tour in 1976. Greg is a very great racer, he said, but he hasn't won a stage. He hasn't shown the panache of a Merckx or an Hinault. In rebuttal, LeMond pointed out at a news conference that he finished second in the 2 biggest mountain stages, Alpe d'Huez and Les Ardennais. I think I've dominated this race from start to finish, he said. If I had worried about individual stage victories, it's possible I would have lost the Tour de France. He finished 6th in the overall points competition, 5th in the mountain competition, and 8th in the combat competition. Panache, panache, LeMond snorts. It's a race of tactics, not panache. Sounding more than a mite defensive, LeMond used his news conference to answer his critics. There are always people who aren't happy with how you ride and when you ride, he said. I could ride every race in the world and give half my salary to the poor, and I'd still be criticized. There's always that 20% who criticize. Prominent among them had been Merckx. Retired for a dozen years and now a bicycle manufacturer in Belgium, he often takes pot shots at today's riders. I think Merckx is jealous, LeMond said, in what was regarded as a reference to his 1990 salary of nearly $2 million, probably as much as the Belgian earned in a decade. I'm as good in the Tour de France as Merckx was. He got no argument from Luis Ocaña, who long competed against Merckx and won the 1973 Tour. Is LeMond a great champion? Said Ocaña, repeating a question a few days before the finish. Good God, I think yes. If he isn't a great rider, what are the others? He's got it all, character, panache, and the victories. He's won 2 world championships and 2 Tour de France. What more can anybody want? Make that 3 Tours de France now and counting.
We hope you have enjoyed Tour de France by Samuel Abt as read by Will Harris. You can find High Top Sports tapes wherever books are sold.